So good morning, everyone. This is the second of our series on project management for the MNI University. And this session will be on risk management. And I know that this was a topic that we had a lot of questions about in our last session. So I hope that we're able to answer all those questions. During the session, if you have questions, just raise your hand, ask me, enter them in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to answer everyone's questions fully. So let's get started. Our agenda today, is we're first going to describe what is risk, and then I look at some tools to identify risks and then trace those and track them. How do you communicate risk to your sponsor and your stakeholders? And then how do you budget for risk in your project? And then we're also going to talk about how risk frequently leads to change management, which is another aspect of project management. So the current edition of the PMBOK, which is the 7th edition of the project management body of knowledge, defines risk management as the uncertainty performance domain. So we've actually renamed this performance area. And the uncertainty performance domain addresses activities and functions associated with risk and uncertainty. And to be successful in this domain, you'll look at results around the awareness of the environment in which projects occur. You want to proactively respond to risk and uncertainty, anticipate those threats and also opportunities with understanding their consequences, to maintain a project schedule with little negative impact from those risks, and also have the opportunity to realize or to take advantage of opportunities to improve the project performance. And throughout, you want to effectively utilize the cost and schedule reserves to maintain project objectives. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, so what is uncertainty? In its broadest sense, uncertainty is simply not knowing something. So you don't have all the information, you don't have all the answers, but it's stated in the PMBOK guide that there are many nuances to uncertainty, such as risk that is associated with not knowing future events, ambiguity associated with not being aware of current or future conditions, and then complexity associated with dynamic systems having unpredictable outcomes. So this is how we define risk when we're talking about risk management or uncertainty. So these definitions hopefully will help you to better understand or describe the uncertainty performance domain. So uncertainty is a lack of understanding and awareness of issues, events, paths to follow, or solutions to pursue. Ambiguity, on the other hand, is a state of being unclear, having difficulty in identifying the cause of events, or having multiple options from which to choose. Complexity is a characteristic of a program or project or its environment that is difficult to manage due to human behavior, system behavior, and ambiguity. Volatility is the possibility of rapid and unpredictable change. And then finally, risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on one or more of the project outcomes. Any questions at this point? So that's a lot to take in. But overall project risk is the overall effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole, arising from all of these sources of uncertainty. And so this stacks up, and you will have multiple risks from all sorts of sources, and they stack up to become your overall project risk. And at some point, this may become too high for the organization, and they may simply cancel the project. Oops, looks like I got a little problem here with my slide. So how do you deal with the risks or threats, as they may be called? There are many different strategies, and the most common are these. You can avoid the risk, and that is when the project team acts to eliminate the threat or protect the project from its impact. You can escalate, and this happens usually when the team or the project sponsor determines that the risk is beyond the scope of the project, or it exceeds the project manager's authority. To transfer means to shift the ownership of the risk to a third party to manage. And then that third party will bear the impact of the risk if it does occur. You can mitigate. This is one of my favorites. You can mitigate the risk by taking proactive actions to reduce the probability of its occurrence or the impact if it does occur. So early mitigation, taking those proactive actions, will try to repair any damage if the risk occurs. Or you can simply accept the risk. Now, this acknowledges that the risk exists, and you just simply accept it. You don't take any actions, and there are two things you can do. You can build a contingency plan, or you can just do nothing. I don't like that, but that is a strategy. So how do you identify risks? You have to consider the project in its environment. And this is something that you do in conjunction with your team. And the project manager is not going to have all the knowledge, all the skill to be able to do this in a vacuum. So you want to engage your team to consider all the possibilities. Oh, are you guys not seeing the slides? Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you seeing them now? Still, oh goodness. Because they're changing on my side. Let me go back. My apologies. Oh gosh. Can you see that now? The introduction slide? All right. Oh, my apologies. I'll send this slide deck out to all of you. And thank you for letting me know. So here we are. This is the overall project risk. Here's the strategies for dealing with risk. So here we are, identifying the risk. This is where we dropped off. All right. So considering the risk in the environment. So what do I mean by environment? Technology is one environment. So does your project involve complex, evolving, or possibly obsolete technology? And if that is the case, what sort of threats or risks might occur as a result of that? Does anyone have a suggestion or an example? Lori, do you want to offer a suggestion?
What comes to mind for me is MRP or ERP systems. They're constantly evolving, and it's very expensive for organizations to keep up with that technology. And so some of the back end technology that ERP systems offer are still done manually by a lot of organizations. And so it takes much more time and effort and manpower to do those things.
That's a perfect example. Thank you very much. So an example for me is a project that I worked on where my supplier announced that the product that I was purchasing was becoming obsolete. And so I was then required to develop a plan to cut in a replacement product for an aircraft that was already in service. So that involved number one, getting the buy-in of my airline customers and going through all of the testing and certification required to show that the new product was a drop-in replacement, and that had to be done in a very short time because there was an absolute date when the supplier would no longer produce the existing product. So, you know, there's a definite limit. You have a runway, and then that's it. So that's an example of risk. So one risk that we saw was, what if we don't complete the qualification and regulatory work, or what if our customers don't accept this replacement product and there is no replacement and we cannot get any more of the existing product? What do we do then? So, and then whenever you're dealing with any sort of cutting edge technology, sometimes we talk about the bleeding edge of technology because you simply don't know all of the risks that you may face. All right, so physical environment. That's another area where you may see risks, because is your project going to be impacted by hazardous conditions or environmental conditions, dangerous weather conditions, anything like that? And, you know, we cannot control the weather, but we can forecast it. So do we need to add into our reserves something to account for the fact that, oh, it's going to be some sort of inclement weather conditions? Is there, so then you've got the project funding and other economic factors. That's an environment to consider. So is your project subject to any sort of resource constraints? And that includes both financial constraints as well as human capital. And then what about price volatility and inflation? So consider that as an environment as well. Legal constraints. Is your project subject to any kind of legal, regulatory, or legislative constraints? So this might be things that you may need to get permitting. You may need to get some sort of regulatory approval. Maybe you have OSHA constraints. Maybe you have to get approval to drill a new oil well. All sorts of constraints that involve legal or regulatory issues. Hi, Carl. Could you put your mute on, please, so we don't get the feedback? And then,
Sorry, that was.
Okay, there you go. Market influences. So are there market conditions that may impact your project? And this could also include, oddly enough, this could be social market influences. And then political influences. So is the project dependent on organizational politics? That can be difficult to deal with. And then you've got other types of political influences. So this could be actually governmental type of politics as well. So it's important for the project manager to work with the team and the team of stakeholders to continually monitor the project for potential risks and then to log them in a risk register. So I'm a big believer in a formal risk register so that you have a view of what's going on. Does anyone have any questions or comments about how you identify the risks? Okay, let's move on. So now we're going to evaluate the risks that we've identified. So the ISO 14971 risk assessment matrix. So this is a tool you may see used frequently. The ISO actually no longer requires a risk assessment matrix, but it's still a very standard tool. So on the x-axis, you have the severity of the risk if it were to occur. So it's either insignificant all the way up to catastrophic. And so severity may also be described as impact. And then on the y-axis, you have the likelihood or probability that this risk is going to occur. So that can range from rare to almost certain. So if it's down here in the lower left-hand quadrant, if it's insignificant and it's also rare, so not likely to occur and not very impactful if it did occur, then that's going to be green. We're not going to be too worried about that. We're not going to assign very much of a reserve for that risk. But up here, where it's very likely to occur and very severe if it does occur, that's going to be high, and we're going to assign a reserve for that. So this is going to be, this is bad, this is good. Any questions on that? And you're going to work with your team and you're going to collect as much information as possible when you're evaluating these risks. But it's not like this is rocket science where there's a lot of calculating to be done. It's more or less thumbs up, thumbs down sort of stuff. And then you want to put together a threat profile. So this is more or less what your risk register would sort of look like. You give an ID, you give a short name to the risk, you list the impact and the probability, and the impact multiplied by the probability results in a severity score. And this is where you begin to build your overall risk profile for your project. So all of these things together will help your project, your team understand what the overall project risk is. Okay. And this is just a snapshot right out of the PMBOK guide. Carol, did you have a question?
Yes, hi, Angela. From your experience, how often do issues arise that aren't in your risk assessment? They're surprises, and how do you handle those? Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully your team is able to because of your constant vigilance, you're able to keep most things in the risk register, but it is possible that things will come up that are surprises. And I'm going to say that practically every project has one of those, at least one of those. And those are usually the things that that can be, oh gosh, that can cause the project to really fall behind on the schedule or really overrun the budget. I would say almost every time that there's something that will come up that could be like that. And that's when the team has to pull together a plan to mitigate that risk. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you, Angela.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, I'll move on. So taking the numbers that you calculate, and you can see that you can calculate these month over month. You can begin to create a timeline and graph these, and this sort of visual shows you how the threat profile is reduced over time. That's your goal, to reduce the threat profile over time through your activity to mitigate or transfer and those other actions. You want to reduce the risk of the project. Any questions here? Okay, so communicating risk. Risk reviews. So it's very important to regularly schedule risk reviews, and there are different levels of risk reviews because you want to keep your team of stakeholders, and especially the sponsor, apprised of any risks in the project. One of the best ways to do that is through your daily stand-ups. If your project is following a stand-up method. So this is the daily stand-up is a good way to cadence, or to pulse the team for any new risks that are coming up, or any activity to improve the risks, and just to get those progress reports to resolve the active risks. But a more formal way is your weekly status meetings. And this is where you're going to be updating your risk register, taking action on your risk management, making certain that everything is working. And so that's a more formal. You're going to be getting the status from each member of the team on risks that they're working on. And then finally, you've got your retrospectives or your lessons learned meetings. And this is where you'll understand why risks have occurred in the first place, and you'll seek improvement. So this is going to identify best practices and implement them. I do want to add another sort of meeting. I didn't put it in the slide, but a postmortem can also be useful. And this is after something has happened, you will hold a postmortem to find out why did this occur? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How could we have done something differently? And a postmortem oftentimes is used when something goes wrong, but it can also be used when something goes very well, so that you could identify a best practice. It's sort of like a retrospective, but it's much more detailed. It usually involves interviewing the participants, and will result in a report and an outbrief. Any questions there? Okay, so then there's also a more formal communication of a risk advisory document. So when you have a risk that is more severe, so I would say where the severity is more than 15, so your probability times your impact is equal to 15 or more, I would recommend a formal communication to your sponsor and possibly other stakeholders. And there are lots of templates available for this. If you'd like, I can send you a template. But whatever template you use, it should contain at a minimum the name of the project and the date of the communication, the name of the project manager, the type of risk that you're describing, all of the facts that are related to the risk. So what is the relevant information that you have at the time, the probability and the impact of the risk, so that's the severity, the strategy to deal with the risk, and why your team has selected that strategy. So you want to provide a solution if you can, and then the schedule for the resolution if it's appropriate. So if you're simply just going to accept the risk, then there's no resolution. But if you're going to mitigate the risk, what are you going to do to mitigate that risk, and what is the schedule for that? Because if you're facing a severe risk, you want to communicate that formally to your sponsor as soon as possible, because you do not want your leadership to be blindsided by a risk which may become an issue, and that could derail the project or have further ramifications to the organization. So you want to be open and honest and transparent about this potential risk. And so that's why I would recommend a formal communication, so that you have this fully documented up front and as soon as possible. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. All right, budgeting for risk. So there are two types of budget for risk. There is the management and the contingency reserves. Now, a reserve is simply it's like an account. It's an amount of either time or money that is set aside to account for your risk management. So a contingency reserve is set aside to address identified risk should they occur. Now, because this is a known risk, the amount that is set aside for the contingency reserve is calculated as the cost of the project multiplied by the risk of the contingency. So if you've got $1 million project and the risk of the contingency, so the probability that this risk is going to occur, is 15%, then you take the $1 million times 15%, and your reserve, your contingency reserve for that individual risk would be $150,000. Now, you do this for every known risk, and that's how you create your contingency reserve. Management reserve is a budget category for unknown risks, and it's anything that's unplanned, but within scope of the project. So this is usually established by the organization between 5 and 15%. It's dependent on the organization's appetite for risk. So if your company is really risk averse, it'll be more. If they have an appetite for risk and they're willing to, run really hot, it may be lower. So based on their risk profile, their risk appetite, you take the total cost of the project times whatever value your organization is comfortable using. And again, that's typically between 5 and 15%. But these reserves then become a part of the project's overall budget, but they're only accessed when needed. Any questions about that? Okay, all right. And again, I want to just point out, this is where your project sponsor is very, very helpful, because you can go to your project sponsor to, number one, access these funds or ask for more funds when additional risks come up. Okay, our final topic then is how risk can lead to change management. So suppose that you're in an effort to avoid or mitigate a risk that your project, your product would overheat in a testing environment, engineering had to introduce a design change. Well, now you've moved into the area of change management. And this is just one scenario that is offered to demonstrate how risk management can sometimes lead to change management for a project. And that's an entirely different topic. There are other areas where maybe a product was returned for a quality issue, and now you've got to make a quality change. And that also, so you've always got those types of risks, and that can lead to change management. You may find out in the course of your project that you missed some scope when you were doing the WBS. So now you have to add that. And these are all possibilities because you're dealing with complex technology, changing customer requirements, regulatory details, shifting environmental issues, weather conditions. All of these things are constantly in flux, and frankly, that's part of the world of being a project manager. That you never know what you don't know, and so that's how come risk management leads to change management. It's like the horse and the cart sometimes. But when a change does come up, it's frequently managed as a sub-project within the main overall project. If it's in scope, if it's something that comes up that's out of scope, that may launch an entirely new project. And you'll probably get that too. So be ready for that. All right. Does anyone have any questions at this point, or would you like to go back and look at any of the slides again? Because that brings us to an end. Katie or Sam, I just want to make sure I covered everything that you wanted. I agree, that was a lot of information. We covered it very quickly. And again, I can send the slides out to everyone. All right. If there are no more questions, I think that will
Please
bring
do
it.
send those slides.
Okay,
Please do send those slides to me.
I will do that.
And can you do from last week also, since I missed?
I will be happy to do that, Carl. Thank you. All right.
Thank
So if you would like to contact me, if you think of any questions, you need any further help, you'd like a template, this is how you can contact me. My phone number, website, and email address. And again, thank you so much for attending. It's been my pleasure to talk to you today about risk management, one of my favorite topics. And Carol, thank you. I see your message. And Katie tells me that the recording will be going online soon, so you'll be able to access the recording from last week as well as this week. And thank you so much for your participation. It's been a pleasure, and I'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.